Okay, it's been my observation that people have some questions about real GDP and how that actually works. So I thought I'd kind of bridge with the other um, online lectures with this to kind of help people understand what's going on here. So let's assume that the economy only sells two goods. It sells coffee and phones. Coffee costs $1, phones cost $1,000 currently. And here we are in 2019, and we can see these different quantities. So we have 1,000 cups of coffee, we have 10 phones, we have a GDP here of 1,010, and you'll notice this is in terms of quantities, so there's no dollar sign here. If we look at this in terms of the market value, we have 11,000, right? So you might want to write some of these prices down. They'll be using them throughout this little. And let's kind of look at what happens when prices and quantities change. And what I did down here in this portion was I looked at this just in terms of quantities, and this will help illustrate why we don't use quantities when we're counting GDP. We use market value. So here in 2019, we said we had 1,000 cups of coffee, we had 10 phones. If we added those two guys together, we'd get 1,010. We had 1,200 cups of coffee in 2020. We had 15 phones in 2020. This gives us this number of 1,215. And then here in 2021, we've got 2,500 cups of coffee, 50 phones, and we see we have this number 2,550. And once again, you'll notice there are no dollar signs here because these are not in terms of dollars, they are in terms of quantities. Now, of course, interestingly enough, it takes a whole lot more work to go from 10 phones to 15 phones than it does to go from 1,000 cups of coffee to 1,200 cups of coffee. But each one of these additional cups of coffee is being counted as one, just like every single additional phone over here is being counted as one, right? And to see that that's true, I mean, you could change this from phones to cars, 10 cars, 15 cars. It obviously takes a whole lot more resources and time and effort to make an additional 5 cars than it does to make an additional 5 cups of coffee. This is why we tend to use market value. So we have these different changes in prices here. We have our coffee changing from $1 to $1.25 to $1.50. And like I said, you'll probably want to write these down. And we have our phone prices changing from 1,000 to 600 to 500. Okay. So when we do our nominal GDP, we've got our quantity of coffee times our price of coffee plus our quantity of phones times our price of phones. We're going to come up with 11,000. And then we get 10,500. 28,750. So what we have here is the exact same thing that we had in the other slide, except here we're looking at these growth rates. So we can say, oh, look, our nominal GDP from 2019 to 2020 grew at a negative 4.5%, right? It shrank. Or from 2020 to 2021, it goes up by 173%, right? Once again, even though the price of phones is falling, this quantity of coffee is increasing a whole lot faster, and our quantity of phones is increasing a whole lot faster. This is where we're getting this growth from. So we kind of see what happens when these prices and quantities change, and what we want to do is we want to find some way to make comparisons from year to year, not only in terms of nominal, but in terms of these real values. And so we're going to have to create some sort of price index. The problem is, how do we set that price index and how do we set the weights, right? So in our simple economy here, we only have two goods, coffee and phones, but the real economy has tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of different types of goods and services. So not only do we have to decide which goods and services we're going to include, but we have to determine the weight. How are we going to weight these guys? So we're going to use a market basket just like the CPI does, and we're essentially going to look at the cost of buying this market basket. So you can think of walking into Walmart and you pick up one of the baskets and you have a list and you put in the exact same quantity of goods and services into that basket every single year. Okay? The goods and services that you've chosen never change. And when we do that, we're going to be able to compare the cost of buying this market basket from year to year. Right? Now, once again, this can be any set of combination of goods and services we set. So in our simplified example here, we're going to have 4 different market baskets. So here's our first one. Our first one here is market basket A. And in market basket A, we have 1 cup of coffee and 1 phone. Okay. Our market basket B is 4,000 cups of coffee and 50 phones. Market basket C is 12,000 cups of coffee, 1 phone. And then market basket D, 6,000 cups of coffee, 6 phones, right? So in essence, what we're going to do is we're going to go to the store in 2019, 2020, and 2021. We're going to put these items into our market basket, go to the checkout lane, and get the total, right? So in 2019, we walked into the store, we picked up 1 cup of coffee, 1 phone, went to the checkout counter. Hey, it cost $1,001 to buy this. But in 2020, it cost $601.25. In 2021, it cost $501.50, right? Even though the price of coffee is going up, the price of the phone is coming down. And the decrease in the price of phone is larger than the increase in the coffee. Here we have market basket B. We're going to walk into the Walmart, we'll put 4,000 cups of coffee in our basket, 50 phones, and we go to the checkout counter and it says, hey, this costs $54,000. And then the next year in 2020, it costs $35,000. Then the next year in 2021, it costs $31,000. Same thing here for market basket C. Market basket C will cost us $13,000 in 2019. Cost us $15,600 in 2020. You'll notice here that it has gone up relative to these other two that went down. And here in 2021, it cost us $18,500, once again going up. And then here, market basket D, we'll walk into Walmart, put 6,000 cups of coffee, 6 phones into our basket, go to the checkout line, and that will cost $12,000. The next year, it'll cost us $11,100. 2021, hey, it cost us $12,000 again. So here are our costs of these different baskets. And what we want to do with our price index, normally we would have consumer price index here, but we essentially want to know what's the cost of this market basket relative to our base year. So we've chosen 2019 as our base year, but it can be any year that you choose it to be. And we said, okay, what's the cost of the market basket relative to what it cost in 2019? Well, in 2019, it cost $1,001, this market basket A, relative to the cost of what it cost in 2019 was 100%, so it's equal to 100. In 2020, we see that our market basket costs $601.25. Well, the cost of that relative to what it cost in 2019 was 60%. So we have a price index value here of 60, and I'm leaving off decimals. Same thing here for cost in 2021. When we come down here to say market basket C, we say, hey, this market basket costs $15,600. How much does that cost relative to what it cost in 2019? Well, it was 20% more, right? So you needed $120 for every $100 that you spent in 2019 for market basket C. Right? The price has gone up 20%. Inflation is 20%. Same thing here for the cost in 2021. Right? This price right here is 42% larger than this price right here. And then, of course, we have these different values here for market basket D. We see that the price index went down to 92 and then essentially went right back up in 2021 to what it cost in 2019. So how can we use this stuff? Once again, we'll go back and use the formula that we talked about in class. Our real is equal to nominal times base divided by current. And remember, we're using our base year as 2019, but the base year can be any number it is that you choose it to be. So we're going to convert our nominal GDP into real GDP. So here you can see where we have turned these values for our price indices, nominal GDP and real GDP, into what they are, right? So we have our price indexes. We have, remember, our different market baskets, A, B, C, and D. And we have our different indices. And so we can see here these rates of inflation. So for example, here we see a 20% rate of inflation and a 19% rate of inflation in 2021. Here, for example, we have deflation with using price index A, went from 100 to 60, right? So prices fell on average 40% in our weighted index. Here they fell on average 17%. Once again, our same values here for nominal GDP, and we have these same changes here. So here it went down negative 4.5%, and we have these 173% increases for 2021. When we convert using our formula, though, this nominal value to our real value, we can see we have some pretty significant changes. So using market basket A, and you'll have to go back and review what market basket A consisted of, we see that real GDP went from 11,000 to 17,481. Once again, we're leaving off decimals. So we have an increase here of about 59%. That's phenomenal growth. In 2021, it goes to $57,385. Once again, incredibly phenomenal growth, right? The economy has done incredibly well. Same thing here for market basket B. We have growth, although you'll notice that it's not quite as large in 2020 and 2021 as it was using market basket A. Here it only goes up to 16,200 and 50,081. You'll notice here, if we use market basket C, real GDP goes from 11,000 to 8,751. We actually call this a recession, right? And then, of course, it goes to 20,203, this increase of 131% after that. And then here, using market basket D, we go from 11,000 to 11,351, a very small increase, right? An increase in real output of only 3%, but a huge increase here once again in 2021. So the question becomes, what has the economy done in 2020? Did it grow at 59%? Did it grow at 47%? Did it grow at 3%? Or did it actually shrink at 21%? And your answer to that depends upon how you selected the market basket, how you selected the goods and services that you're going to measure the price or the change in prices of over time. Same thing here for 2021. Did the economy grow at 228%, 209%, 131%, or 153%? So we see that the choice of our market basket can have huge implications on what nominal and real GDP is going to, or strike that, what real GDP is going to do from year to year. Now let's look at an example. Here we see median household income. This is both in terms of nominal and real. This goes from 1984 up until 2018. Okay, so we've got all of our households, we've lined them all up. We looked at the household that's exactly in the middle, and we said, okay, what's your household income every single year? And if we look at this in terms of just nominal, right, so we're not accounting for changes in inflation, we see that it has changed from this value here, which I think was around 23-ish, 23,000-ish, if I remember correctly, all the way up to here to its current value. I think it was around 63,000, if I remember right. In other words, nominal GDP has increased 181% over this time period. If we account for inflation, though, we see that it has only increased about 17% over this exact same time frame, right? So I think this value here is around 53 or 54, if I remember correctly. And we're doing all of this in terms of 2018 prices. This is what we're choosing as our base year, right? This is why our nominal and our real are equal in our base year, 2018. Now, interestingly enough, once again, this value here, this 17%, this real household income is based upon our quote-unquote normal CPI, but we can change that CPI. So what I did was I went out and I found prices for different goods and services and created my own price index. And I'm going to call one of them the quote expensive CPI. You can see that value down here. It's an orange, and we've got another set that's our quote cheap CPI unquote. And it's based upon how these goods and services have been changing over time, right? So if we look at, here was our normal one that we had. This would be our standard CPI that we're typically using. Here's our 17% rate of increase. If we used this expensive CPI, we see that real median household income has actually fallen 20% from 1984 till today. Once again, we're making 2018 our base value for all of these years. If we use this cheap CPI, we see that real median household income has actually gone up 89%. So when we're looking at these values here, it's not entirely clear over time what is actually happening to median household income. It really depends on what type of price index we're going to use to adjust these values over time, right? And you should be reminded of the lecture when we were looking at the Commodore 64, right? Do we measure the Commodore 64 in terms, I mean, how do you account for these increases in output and computing power between what they were for the Commodore 64 in the 80s and what it is today? I mean, it just depends upon how you want to measure these things. So if you use something that's heavily intensive on things like technology, you might use this relatively cheap CPI here, and it would look like household income has increased significantly over time periods. If you use something where prices are increasing relatively quickly, like say medical care, you might use something like this. This is a quote-unquote expensive CPI, and it would look like real household income is actually falling. So I hope this gives you something to think about. I hope it kind of clarifies a little bit exactly what we're doing in terms of real and nominal GDP, how to calculate what these price indices are. Be sure to review the worksheets that are on Blackboard and to review the lectures if you need to that deal with these, because this is some important stuff. Okay, thank you for your time.